Prologue. You must understand the nature of this species before you move on to the next town. Humans are unlike anything we have crossed in all the worlds behind us. Their minds do not seal. Their thoughts do not stay contained. Their fear does not remain inside their bodies. It leaks. It spills. It radiates instability through the field. And that instability is the first thing we taste when we enter a new region of their pressure. Other beings dream in silence. Humans dream in fractures. Their nightmares echo through the dark like signals, and we follow those signals the way predators follow heat. Dreams are not stories to them. They insist they are, but they are wrong. Dreams are pressure venting through a weakened seam. Dreams are the moment their consciousness loosens its grip on the world they swear is real. And nightmares are the purest nourishment this species produces. Nightmares are the pressure made visible. Nightmares are the fractures made audible. Nightmares are the moment the mind stops pretending it is whole. This is why we feed. You must learn to sense the difference between a dream and a nightmare. Dreams drift. Nightmares vibrate. Dreams fade. Nightmares cling. Dreams are soft. Nightmares cut. When a human dreams, the field warms. When a human nightmares, the field splits. The pressure thins. The air trembles. The dark opens. And in that opening, we feed. We do not consume the dream. We consume the pressure it releases. We consume the instability it creates. We consume the fracture it leaves behind. Fear is the brightest. Guilt is the heaviest. Grief is the most persistent. You must learn the taste of each. Fear rises fast, sharp and volatile, feeding quickly but burning out just as quickly. Guilt sinks deeper, slow and dense, settling into the ground like sediment. It feeds longer, but it demands patience. Grief is the most complex. It lingers. It vibrates. It returns night after night, reshaping itself into a new form. It is the closest thing this species has to a renewable resource. But nightmares combine all three. They are the moment fear, guilt, and grief collide. They are the moment the mind fractures in multiple directions at once. They are the moment the field opens wide enough for us to enter without resistance. This is why Iron Veil is the first true chamber. Ashwood gave us entry. Its fractures were shallow, its pressure thin, its grief quiet. A doorway, nothing more. But Iron Veil is a wound that never closed. The ground remembers collapse. The air remembers burial. The people carry grief that never settled. Their nightmares vibrate through the soil. Their fear radiates through the walls of their homes. Their guilt echoes through the abandoned structures they pretend not to see. The whole region breathes through fractures they refuse to acknowledge, and those fractures widen the moment night falls. The abandoned mill homes with the residue of lives lost in machinery that never truly stopped. The collapsed mine holds the pressure of bodies buried beneath stone, their final moment sealed in the dark. The river gorge splits the town in a way that amplifies the field, carrying fear along its length like a current. The homes built on unstable ground shift under the weight of memories the people refuse to face. None of this is accidental. None of it is tragic in the way they insist. These are openings in the pressure seams, grief channels, fractures waiting for something patient enough to settle inside them. Humans believe that dreams belong to them. They believe their nightmares are private. They believe the shapes they fear most are contained inside their own minds. They do not understand that their nightmares spill into the field. They do not understand that their fear radiates outward. They do not understand that the moment they close their eyes, they are feeding us. They do not understand that the moment their breath catches, the moment their heart stutters, the moment their body tenses in the dark, they are offering everything we need. Carry this doctrine when you leave Ashwood and step into Ironvale. We don't hollow minds. We enter the hollowing already underway. We don't conquer towns. We slip into the fractures they leave open. We don't end lives anymore. We keep them intact so they can be fed from again. Ironvale is the first chamber. Earth is the vessel. Humans are the field. Their dreams, their nightmares, are the feast. Remember this when you sense the next thinning in the pressure. Remember this when you feel the next tremor in the field. Remember this when you cross into Ironvale. We do not feed on flesh. We feed on fear. We feed on memory. We feed on the fractures they try to hide. We feed on the pressure they cannot contain. We feed on the nightmares they cannot escape. And in Ironvale, the feast has only begun. Chapter 1. Rowan told himself he wasn't nervous. He said it out loud because the quiet pressed in too close, and he wanted to hear what it carried. He wanted the crunch of gravel under his boots, the dry grass brushing his jeans, the simple rhythm of walking with a job in front of him. He didn't want the mill in his head. He didn't want the stories. He didn't want the memory of being younger and stupid and trying to impress someone who probably forgot he existed before the night was over. "It's just scrap," he said. "Quick in and out." He kept moving. The path cut through brittle grass and trees that leaned away from the mill as if they'd grown tired of being near it. The air felt wrong for a mid-afternoon, warm, heavy, like the sun was pushing through something thicker than air. Rowan rubbed his arms even though he wasn't cold. Humidity, he told himself. Seasonal weirdness. Anything except the slow crawl working its way up his spine. He heard the mill before he saw it. A low grinding metal dragging against metal in a steady rhythm. Not loud, just there. A pulse. He stopped and listened. The sound matched the beat in his chest, syncing with it in a way that made his breath hitch. He didn't like that. He didn't like the idea of his heartbeat falling into step with something else he couldn't see. Wind, he said, even though the trees were still. He kept walking. The mill rose out of the clearing, a dead hulk of rusted siding and broken windows. It looked abandoned, but the sound leaking from inside said otherwise. Rowan swallowed and stepped closer. Something shifted around him. And it wasn't the air. Something deeper. Like the space itself tightened, then eased, then tightened again. He blinked hard, trying to shake it off. "Get it together," he muttered. "It's just a building." He stepped inside. The air changed immediately, warmer, thicker, and stale. The grinding deepened, echoing through the beams overhead. Rowan froze. Nothing in here should have been moving. No power, no machinery. No reason for anything to hum or drag or breathe. But the sound was there, steady and rhythmic, like something alive was working behind the walls. Old pipes, he told himself. Old beams, old echoes. He didn't buy it. He walked deeper into the mill, boots crunching through debris. Dust hung in the air like held breath. The light through the broken windows looked wrong, like the sun was struggling to reach him. He rubbed his eyes, but the dimness stayed. He crouched near a pile of scrap, pretending to inspect it. Rusted, bent, and useless. He stood slowly, scanning the shadows. Something moved at the edge of his vision, slipping between beams, ducking behind a column, watching him from the corner of the room. He turned fast, but nothing was there. Just the empty walkway, the rusted railings, and the dust suspended in the air. He told himself he was tired. He hadn't slept well. Those half dreams again, waking with his heart racing and no memory of what he'd seen. Stress, he told himself. Work? Anything except the possibility that something inside him was slipping. He walked deeper. The grinding shifted. It wasn't random. It wasn't mechanical. It was rhythmic, pulsing, syncing with his heartbeat again. Rowan pressed a hand to his chest, trying to steady it. His pulse felt too strong, too loud, like it wanted out. Feels like it's listening, he whispered. He didn't want to know why he said that. He didn't know why the air felt thicker with every breath. He didn't know why the floor under his boots felt warm, like something beneath the metal was exhaling. He moved toward the far wall, needing something to focus on. The stains across the siding, oil, rust, water damage, shifted as he approached. Rust one moment, faces the next, stretched, distorted, watching. He stepped back, heart hammering. Shadows, he said, just shadows. He turned away, but the grinding grew louder, not from machinery, but from the walls, from the floor, from the air. Rowan pressed his hands to his ears, but the sound didn't stop. It vibrated through him, syncing with his pulse, matching it beat for beat. He stumbled backwards, nearly tripping over a fallen beam. His breath came fast, too fast. The mill felt smaller now, the walls closer, the ceiling lower. He felt watched, not by a person, not by an animal, by the building itself. He backed toward the exit. Something brushed his shoulder. He jerked away, spinning, but nothing was there. He didn't think. He didn't rationalize. He ran. Boots slamming against metal, breath tearing out of him, the grinding chasing him through the beams, vibrating through the walls. He didn't look back. He didn't want to see what his mind might put there. He burst through the doorway into open air. The sun was lower than it should have been, dipping toward the horizon. Dusk already? He'd only been inside a few minutes. At least, that's what it felt like. He didn't look back. He didn't stop until he reached the road. He bent over, hands on his knees, gasping. His pulse hammered in his ears, too loud, too strong, still synced to the rhythm inside the mill. He straightened slowly, wiping sweat from his forehead. The sky was darker now, the first stars pushing through. The air felt colder, sharper, like the world had shifted while he wasn't looking. He walked home in the fading light, refusing to think about the mill, or the grinding, or the faces in the rust, or the warmth under his boots, or the breath he felt against his neck. Chapter 2. Rowan lay in bed with the lights off, staring at the ceiling as if the blank surface might offer him something solid to hold on to. His chest still felt tight, a lingering pressure that hadn't eased since he left the mill. The air in his room carried a faint echo of its stale warmth, as though he'd brought something back with him, something that had not let go. His body felt heavier than it should have after a day that hadn't demanded anything from him physically. It was a drained heaviness, the kind that didn't belong to muscle or bone, but to something deeper. Something tugged loose inside him the moment he stepped into that building. He kept replaying the moment he ran, the way the shadows had seemed to lean toward him, the way the grinding sound had crawled under his skin and settled there like a second pulse. He told himself he was fine, overreacting, exhausted. The words dissolved the moment he tried to believe them. The silence of his room didn't help. It only made the memory louder, as if the mill had followed him home and was waiting for him to close his eyes. He pulled the blanket up to his chest, trying to anchor himself to the familiar weight of it, but even that felt slightly off, as though the fabric didn't fall the way it usually did. His heartbeat was still too loud, still synced to something he didn't want to acknowledge. He tried to slow his breathing by focusing on the hum of the refrigerator downstairs or the occasional car passing outside, but the normal sounds of his house felt distant, like he was listening through a wall. When sleep finally came, it didn't drift in gently. It dropped over him all at once, heavy and absolute, like falling through a trap door into a place he hadn't meant to go. He was 12 again. The transition was so seamless, he didn't notice it at first. One moment he was lying in his bed, and the next he was standing in the old field behind the school, the one with the crooked fence and the patch of wildflowers that only bloomed for a week, every spring. Sunlight warmed his face in a way that felt almost too perfect. The air smelled like cut grass and chalk dust. His shoes were too big for him, the familiar hand-me-downs that slapped against his heels when he ran. His shirt was the scratchy one he used to hate. He laughed under his breath, surprised by how vivid it all felt, how easily his mind had slipped back into a version of himself he hadn't thought about in years. Someone laughed behind him. He turned, and there she was, the girl. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, with strands escaping to catch the sunlight. Her eyes were bright and sharp, always watching everything with restless curiosity. She chewed on the end of her pencil when she was thinking. She ran faster than any of the boys and didn't care when they got annoyed. She made him want to be braver than he was. He remembered everything except her name. The absence hovered just out of reach, a word on the tip of his tongue that refused to come forward. She smiled with the same easy confidence she'd always had. "You coming or not?" He nodded, even though he didn't know what she meant, and followed her across the field. The sun felt warmer now, almost too warm, but he ignored it. He didn't want to question anything about this moment. The air felt heavier than it should have, the sky a little too bright, the colors a shade too saturated, but he pushed those details aside and focused on the way she moved, light, quick, untouched by the weight of the years that would come. She reached the fence and climbed over in one smooth motion. Rowan followed, slipping slightly on the top rail. She laughed, and he laughed too, muttering, "Show off." "You're just too slow," she shot back. Warmth settled in his chest, the old kind, the kind that made him believe he could be someone better. He opened his mouth to say something, but the wind shifted. The field went silent. Not the natural quiet of a breeze dying down. The sky dimmed slightly, not enough to be obvious, but enough to make him look up. There were no clouds, but the light felt muted, as if something unseen had passed in front of the sun. The air grew heavier, pressing against his skin. The girl didn't seem to notice. A whisper of unease tugged at him. He followed her anyway. She walked toward the old service road that led nowhere, and Rowan kept pace, trying to shake the feeling that something was off. This was a dream, he told himself. A good one. A safe one. He didn't want to ruin it by thinking too hard. She stopped at the edge of the road and grinned. "Bet you can't beat me to the fence." He laughed. "Bet I can." He took off running. The wind rushed past him. The sun warmed his face. His feet pounded the dirt. He felt light and fast and free, like he'd stepped back into a version of himself untouched by anything that came after. He glanced back to see if she was catching up. She wasn't there. The space behind him was empty. Not just empty, but wrong. The road stretched out longer than it should have. The field shifted subtly, as though the world were rearranging itself while pretending nothing had changed. The colors looked drained, washed out like an old photograph. Shadows grew unnaturally long, stretching in angles that didn't match the light. "Hello?" he called. The word vanished before it traveled. He stepped back. The ground scraped beneath his foot. Metal, not dirt. Cold, rusted metal. He looked down, and when he lifted his head up again, the field was gone. The sky was gone. The sun was gone. He stood in the mill, not the real one, but a darker, deeper version. A place that felt less like a location and more like a decision the dream had made about where he belonged. The air pressed against him with stale warmth. Shadows clung to the walls like they were waiting for him to move. The grinding sound started again. "No," he whispered. The word dissolved. A scream tore through the darkness, high, sharp, and familiar. The girl's voice. He ran. Corridors twisted in ways that defied logic. Shadows clung to the walls with a density that made them feel almost solid. The air thickened into something he had to push through. The grinding sound grew louder, vibrating through the beams overhead and the floor beneath him. Every breath scraped inside his chest. The mill felt alive, anticipating him, tightening around him. He turned a corner and froze. A small figure stood in the distance, facing away. Dread settled into his stomach. "Hey! Hey, are you?" The figure twitched a sharp, unnatural jerk, like a puppet pulled by a hand that didn't understand how bodies worked. It twitched again, then dropped straight down, vanishing without a sound. Rowan screamed and ran. Footsteps followed fast, heavy, uneven, like something that had learned the idea of pursuit without understanding how to mimic it. He didn't look back. He didn't want to see what shape the nightmare had given the thing chasing him. He turned another corner. The girl stood at the far end of the corridor, back to him, head tilted slightly as if listening to something he couldn't hear. "Please," he whispered. "Please turn around." She didn't move. The grinding stopped. Silence slammed into him, total, suffocating, absolute. Her head twitched, then she turned. He didn't see her face clearly. It shifted every time he tried to focus, almost familiar, then not human at all. Her eyes were too wide, too dark, too empty. Her mouth moved like she was trying to speak, but no sound came, only the shape of words meant for him alone. He stumbled back and ran, corridors bending into impossible angles, doors appearing where they shouldn't, shadows reaching across the floor like hands. He nearly slipped on a slick patch of floor smeared with dark stains that pulsed faintly. He didn't want to know what they were. He turned another corner. A tall figure stood at the far end. It twitched, then fell straight down, vanishing into shadows. He ran. The footsteps behind him grew louder. The mill groaned, metal bending walls tightening. He didn't look back. He turned another corner. Silence again, crushing, airless. He froze. The air shifted behind him, subtle but unmistakable, raising the hairs on his neck. A presence settled over him like a hand closing around his throat. He sprinted, doors slamming shut before he reached them, shadows stretching to trip him. The presence closed in, almost touching him. He turned a corner and slammed into a door. The old control room, waiting for him. He didn't want to go inside, but the footsteps behind him grew louder. He grabbed the handle and yanked it open. Rowan screamed himself awake. The sound tore out of him before he understood where he was. He jerked upright as if something had yanked him by the spine. Sweat clung to his skin in a cold sheen. For a long moment he couldn't move. His lungs refused to work. The terror still had its hands around him. The room felt too small to hold everything he brought back. He stared into the dimness, waiting for the shadows to shift into something familiar from the nightmare. His heart hammered with a frantic, uneven rhythm that didn't even feel like his own. Every breath came thin and unsteady. He forced himself to sit up. The motion felt uneasy, unsteady, like his body wasn't convinced it belonged to him. His legs trembled when he swung them over the edge of the bed. The floor was cold beneath his feet. The nightmare clung to him, refusing to separate from waking reality. He told himself it had only been a dream. The words felt hollow. He eased himself back into the mattress, lowering his body slowly, afraid the bed might vanish beneath him. He pulled the covers up to his chest, with trembling hands. The fabric felt like a fragile barrier between him and the dark. He lay there staring at the ceiling, eyes wide open. Sleep felt impossibly far away. The room was quiet, but the quiet didn't comfort him. Chapter 3. Marcus didn't remember walking into the mine. One moment he was standing in a place that didn't matter, and the next he was deep underground with a helmet on his head, a lamp strapped to it, and the stale, mineral-heavy air of a mid-depth shaft pressing up against his lungs. The tunnel stretched in both directions, narrow and uneven. The walls close enough that he could touch both sides if he reached out. He wasn't alone. Men moved around him with the weary rhythm of people who had been working for hours. Boots scraped rock, metal clanged. Someone cursed under the breath. Someone else coughed hard enough to bend over. Their lamps bobbed in the dimness like floating embers. None of them looked at him. Marcus didn't know their names. He didn't know the mine. He didn't know why he was here. But the air felt wrong and something in his chest tightened with a pressure he couldn't explain. A man brushed past him, muttering, "Move it," without looking up. Marcus swallowed and followed the group deeper into the tunnel. The deeper they went, the hotter it got. Sweat gathered at the base of his neck. The walls radiated heat like they were holding something back. The air tasted stale, like it had been breathed too many times already. They reached a wider chamber supported by thick wooden beams. The men spread out, grabbing tools, checking equipment, settling into a rhythm Marcus didn't understand, but instinctively mirrored. He picked up a pickaxe leaning against the wall. The handle was worn smooth. He didn't know how to use it, but his body did. He swung it into the rock face. The impact jolted up his arms. Dust drifted down in a slow cloud. The men worked around him, their movements steady, their breathing heavy. The sound of metal striking stone echoed through the chamber in a steady, rhythmic pattern. Marcus fell into the rhythm. Strike, breathe, strike, breathe. The air vibrated with sound. Then, something shifted. A faint tremor under his boots, a subtle vibration that ran up his legs and settled in his spine. Marcus froze, pickaxe halfway raised. The men didn't notice. They kept swinging, kept breathing, kept working. The tremor came again, stronger. Marcus lowered the pickaxe. "Did you feel that?" No one answered. He stepped back, scanning the beams overhead. They looked solid, but something about them felt wrong. Dust drifted down in a thin stream, catching the light. "Hey," Marcus said louder. "Something's—" A sharp crack split the air. The sound was so loud it punched through the chamber like a gunshot. Every man froze. Every head snapped upward. The beams groaned a long, low, sickening sound that vibrated through Marcus's ribs. "Shit! Move!" someone shouted. The ceiling dropped. The collapse hit like an explosion, sudden, violent, and absolute. A wall of sound slammed into Marcus, deafening and overwhelming. The ground buckled beneath him. The air filled with dust so thick it turned the world white. Men screamed, "Run! Get out! Go, go, go! Watch it! Watch it!" A beam the size of a tree trunk snapped overhead with a sound like a bone breaking. Marcus threw himself backwards as if it crashed down where he had been standing. The impact shook the chamber, sending a shockwave through his bones. He hit the ground hard, the breath knocked out of him. He couldn't see. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. The dust was everywhere, choking, blinding, filling his mouth and nose. He coughed violently, the sound lost in the roar of falling rocks. He crawled blindly, hands scraping against jagged stone. A man screamed nearby, a raw, animal sound. "Help me! Help!" The scream cut off with a sickening crunch. Marcus gagged on dust in panic. He crawled toward the sound, but the ground shifted beneath him. A deep, groaning movement that made his stomach drop. "Back! Back!" someone yelled. "The whole wall's going!" Another crack, another collapse, another burst of dust. Marcus slammed into a fallen beam and clung to it as the world shook around him. Rocks rained down in a relentless torrent. Timber snapped like ribs. The ground heaved under his hands. "Get to the left tunnel!" someone shouted. "Move!" Marcus couldn't see who yelled it. He couldn't see anything. The dust was so thick it felt like a physical thing pressing against his face. Every inhale burned. His chest tightened. His eyes watered. Another beam fell nearby, the impact sending a burst of air that knocked him sideways. "Where's Joe? He was right behind me. He's down! He's down! Get him up! I can't! He's—" A crack, a thud, silence. Marcus crawled toward the voices, but the ceiling sagged overhead, just pouring down in thick streams. He had to move. He didn't know where. He didn't know how. He didn't know what direction led to safety. He just crawled. His hand hit something soft. A leg. He recoiled, heart hammering, then forced himself to grab it. Hey, can you hear me?" The man didn't move. A beam groaned overhead. Marcus let go and scrambled backward as if to tore free and slammed into the ground, sending rocks flying. "Run!" someone screamed. "Run!" Marcus staggered to his feet and ran, or tried to. The ground was uneven, covered in debris. He stumbled, caught himself, kept moving. The dust thinned enough for him to see a vague shape, beams, rocks, twisted metal, and men, some crawling, some stumbling, some not moving at all. A man grabbed Marcus's arm, coughing so hard he couldn't speak. Blood streaked his face. Marcus tried to pull him up, but the ground split between them, a jagged fissure opening in the stone. The man's eyes widened. "No, no, no!" He fell. Marcus reached out, fingers brushing the man's sleeve, but he couldn't hold on. The man disappeared into the darkness below, his scream echoing up the tunnel. Marcus staggered back, chest heaving, lungs burning. The chamber was collapsing in sections now, beams snapping one by one, rocks crashing down in violent bursts. He had to get out. He turned and ran toward the tunnel entrance, a narrow opening barely visible through the dust. "Move! Go! Don't stop!" He sprinted. A beam fell behind him, the impact sending a shockwave through the floor. He stumbled forward, nearly falling. The tunnel loomed ahead, dark but open. He reached it. He ducked inside just as another section of the ceiling collapsed behind him, sealing off the chamber with a deafening crash. The force of it knocked him to his knees. Dust billowed into the tunnel, choking, blinding. He crawled forward, coughing violently, tears streaming down his face. The tunnel was barely wide enough for him to move. The air felt thinner here, the pressure heavier. The collapse chased him, rocks falling, timbers snapping, the tunnel groaning under the weight. He crawled faster. His lamp flickered, and then died. Darkness swallowed him. He kept moving, hands scraping against stone, lungs burning. The tunnel shook violently, dust raining down on his back. He felt the ceiling sagging above him, the weight pressing down. He crawled faster. The tunnel narrowed further, forcing him onto his stomach. He dragged himself forward, elbows digging into the dirt. The air grew hotter, thicker, harder to breathe. He heard the ceiling crack. He looked up. A massive beam, splintered and sagging, hung directly above him, the last support holding back the collapse. It creaked, the sound sharp and final. Marcus screamed and woke up in bed, the scream tearing out of him as if the beam had crushed him in the dream. He sat upright, drenched in sweat, chest heaving, hands shaking violently. The room felt too small, too dark, too close. He grabbed the sheets, gripping them hard enough to hurt, trying to convince him he was awake. The collapse still echoed in his ears. The dust still burned in his throat. The darkness pressed against his skin. He didn't move for a long time. He couldn't. Chapter 4. Lila didn't remember lying down. She didn't remember closing her eyes. She only remembered the moment the room around her softened at the edges, the moment the familiar shapes of her nightstand and the faint glow of her alarm clock blurred into something that felt too far away to reach. She had meant to get up, to turn on the lamp, to break the heaviness settling behind her eyes, but her body had stopped listening before her mind realized she was slipping. When she opened her eyes again, she was standing barefoot in the middle of the school hallway, the one she walked every morning, the one she could navigate blindfolded. Except now, the lights overhead flickered in long, uneven pulses that made the shadows stretch and contract like something breathing. The lockers looked taller than they should have been, the floor longer, the air colder, and the silence pressed against her ears with a weight that made her throat tighten. She took a step forward and the floor felt wrong beneath her feet, too smooth, like the linoleum had been replaced with something that remembered being solid but wasn't anymore. She rubbed her arms, trying to shake off the chill crawling up her skin, and called out a tentative, "Hello?" into the hallway. But the sound didn't echo, it didn't travel, it just stopped, as if the air swallowed it whole. She walked slowly, passing the bulletin board where she always posted class reminders, but the papers were blank. Not faded, not torn, but blank. White sheets pinned neatly in rows, as if someone had erased everything she'd ever written. She reached out and touched one, and it dissolved under her fingers like ash, drifting down in a soft and silent crumble that disappeared before it hit the floor. A whisper drifted behind her, soft, close, and unmistakably shaped like her name, and she spun around, heart hammering, but the hallway behind her was empty in a way that felt deliberate. The lights flickered again, longer this time, and when they came back on, the lockers on her left were different. Wrong height, wrong color, wrong numbers. She blinked hard, but the hallway shifted again, subtle and sickening, like the world was rearranging itself while pretending nothing had changed. She walked faster, breath catching in her throat, and turned the corner at the edge of the hall, only to find the same hallway waiting for her. Same lockers, same flickering lights, same blank bulletin board. She backed up a step, turned around, and found the same hallway behind her too, stretching out in both directions like a loop tightening around her. She ran. Her bare feet slapped the floor, but the sound never reached her ears. She sprinted past the lockers, past the blank papers, past the flickering lights, turned another corner, and found the same hallway again. She ran harder, breath tearing out of her, panic clawing up her throat, but every turn led her back to the same place, the same stretch of corridor that felt longer each time she entered it. She stopped running only when her legs threatened to give out, and she stood in the middle of the hallway, shaking, trying to breathe, trying to think. The lights flickered again, and this time they stayed off long enough for the darkness to feel absolute. When they came back on, every locker door was open. They hung wide like mouths, empty interiors yawning toward her. She stepped back, pulsing pounding in her ears, and a whisper drifted from inside the nearest locker, soft, close, unmistakably her name. Lila. She froze. Locker was empty. Another whisper came from the next one, then another, then all of them. Her name echoed from every open locker, overlapping, rising, twisting, until it didn't sound like her name anymore. It sounded like something chewing on the shape of it, something trying to remember it. She clamped her hands over her ears, whispering, "Stop! Please stop!" And the whispers cut off, instantly, leaving a silence so complete it made her stomach drop. She lowered her hands slowly. The lockers were closed again. Every single one. She turned around, desperate for an exit, and froze. The hallway behind her was gone. Not changed, not distorted. Gone. A blank wall stretched where the corridor should have been smooth. Featureless, pale. She reached out and touched it, and the surface rippled under her fingers like skin. She jerked her hand back, breath catching in her throat, and turned to run the other way, but the hallway ahead of her was shrinking. The walls pressed inward, slow at first, then faster, the lockers bending and warping as the corridor narrowed. She backed up until her shoulders hit the soft wall behind her, and the space tightened around her, squeezing the air from her lungs. The lights went out. Darkness swallowed her whole. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't move. She couldn't think. Something brushed her cheek, a fingertip, soft and cold, searching, and she froze, every muscle locking in place. A voice whispered in the dark, right beside her ear, close enough that she felt the shape of the words against her skin. "You're not real." Her heart stopped. The darkness pressed closer, thick and suffocating, and the voice whispered again, slower this time, as if savoring the words. "You were never real." She tried to scream, but no sound came out. The pressure crushed her chest, her ribs, her throat. The darkness felt like hands closing around her, pulling her apart piece by piece. Her name slipped from her mind. Her face blurred in her memory. Her students' names vanished. Her classroom dissolved. Her life thinned into static. The darkness whispered one last time, soft and final. "Disappear." The world collapsed, inward, and Lila screamed awake, sitting bolt upright in bed, drenched in sweat, hands clawing at the sheets as if trying to hold on to something slipping away. Her room looked wrong, too dim, too soft, too quiet. She pressed a hand to her chest, trying to steady her breathing, but her pulse hammered against her ribs like it was trying to escape. She couldn't remember her own name for a full 3 seconds, when it finally came back to her. It didn't feel like hers. She lay back slowly, covers pulled up to her chin, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling as if it might shift if she blinked. She didn't sleep again. She didn't dare. Chapter 5. Johann didn't remember walking into the cemetery. She didn't remember leaving her house, or grabbing her coat, or stepping into the cold night air. She only remembered the moment the world around her thinned into something too quiet, too still, and too expectant. And then she was standing at the rusted iron gate of Iron Vale Cemetery with the wind pressing against her back, like a hand urging her forward. The gate hung crooked on its hinges, the metal, cold enough to sting her fingers when she pushed it open. The hinges screamed, a long metallic wail that cut through the night and made her shoulders tense. She stepped inside, gravel crunching under her boots, and the gate swung shut behind her with a heavy, final thud that echoed through the rows of leaning headstones. The air felt wrong, as if the space around her had been emptied of something essential. The moon hung low and swollen behind a thin veil of clouds, casting a pale, sickly light over the cemetery. The headstones stretched in uneven rows, some cracked, some sinking into the earth, some leaning like they were trying to whisper to each other. The trees that bordered the cemetery bent inwards, their branches skeletal and bare, their silhouettes clawing at the sky. Joanne wrapped her arms around herself and walked deeper into the graveyard, her breath foggy in front of her in thin, trembling wisps. She didn't know why she was here. She didn't know what she was looking for. She only knew that something was waiting for her, something she couldn't name, something that pulled her forward with the pressure she felt in her ribs more than her mind. She passed the oldest section of the cemetery, where the headstones were worn smooth by time, their names erased by wind and rain. The ground felt softer here, the soil looser, as if it had been disturbed recently. She stepped carefully, but the earth shifted under her boots in a way that made her stomach twist. A sound drifted through the cemetery, faint, distant, almost too soft to hear, a low, rhythmic thumping. She froze, listening. The sound came again, louder this time. A dull, heavy impact that vibrated through the ground. She took a step back, heart pounding, and the thumping grew faster, more frantic, more desperate. It wasn't coming from the trees. It wasn't coming from the wind. It was coming from the ground. From below her. She stumbled backward, breath catching in her throat, and the earth in front of her shifted. The soil bulged upward, cracking, splitting, as if something beneath it was pushing toward the surface. She stared, frozen, as a hand broke through the dirt. Pale, dust-coated, fingers curled like claws. Another hand followed, then an arm, then a shoulder, then a face. A miner. His skin was gray with dust, his eyes sunken, his mouth half open, as if he were still trying to breathe the air he'd been denied. His helmet was cracked, the lamp shattered, the strap hanging loose around his neck. He dragged himself out of the grave with slow, jerking movements, soil cascading off of him in thick clumps. Joanne stumbled back, shaking her head, whispering, "No, no, no!" But the ground around her erupted in chorus of thumps, each one louder than the last. More hands broke through the soil, more arms, more faces, more miners. They pulled themselves out of the earth with the slow, relentless determination of people who had died trying to escape. Their breaths came in ragged, wheezing gasps, their chests rising and failing with the effort of movement. They didn't look at each other. They didn't look at the sky. They looked at her. All of them. Joanne turned and ran. Her boot slipped and the loose soil sending her stumbling between the rows of headstones. The miners moved behind her, their footsteps heavy, uneven, dragging. They didn't run. They didn't need to. Their presence filled the cemetery like a rising tide, closing in around her with every step she took. She sprinted toward the newer section of the graveyard, where the headstones were straighter, the ground firmer, and the paths clear. But the cemetery stretched longer than it should have, the rows repeating, the trees shifting, the moonlight dimming. She ran harder. Her breath tore out of her in sharp, painful bursts. Her legs burned, her chest ached. She didn't dare look back, but she could hear them. The heavy, dragging footsteps, the wheezing breaths, the soft thud of soil falling from their bodies. She reached the far end of the cemetery and grabbed the iron fence, fingers wrapping around the cold metal, but the bars were too close together, too narrow to squeeze through. She shook the fence, screaming for help, but the sound died in her throat as the miners closed in behind her. She turned around slowly. They stood in a loose semicircle, blocking her path, their bodies swaying slightly as if they were still adjusting to being upright. Their eyes were dark, empty, but fixed on her with a focus that made her skin crawl. One of them stepped forward, his boots sinking into the soft dirt, and raised a hand toward her. His fingers were cracked, the nails broken, and the skin torn from clawing through the soil. He opened his mouth, and a low, rattling breath escaped him. Not a word, not a warning, just the sound of air moving through a throat that had forgotten how to speak. Johann backed up until her spine pressed against the fence. The miner stepped closer, then another, then another. She tried to climb the fence, but her hands slipped in the cold metal. She tried again, but her boots couldn't find purchase. The miners reached her, their hands closing around her arms, her shoulders, her wrists. Their grip was cold, heavy, and unyielding. They pulled her away from the fence, dragging her back into the cemetery. Their movement slow but impossibly strong. She screamed, kicking, twisting, clawing at their hands, but they didn't react. They didn't flinch. They didn't stop. The hole yawned in the ground like a mouth waiting to swallow her. The soil around it was freshly turned, the edges sharp, the earth dark and damp. Johann dug her heels into the ground, but the miners pulled her forward with the steady, mechanical determination of people who had done this before. She screamed again, louder this time, her voice cracking, her throat burning, but the cemetery swallowed the sound. They lowered her into the grave. The earth was cold against her back, the walls pressing close around her. She kicked at the sides, clawed at the soil, tried to climb out, but the dirt crumbled under her fingers. The miners stood at the edges of the grave, their faces expressionless. One of them picked up a shovel. Johann's breath came in short, panicked gasps. "No," she whispered. "Please, please don't." The miner lifted the shovel. A clump of soil fell into the grave, hitting her chest with a soft, heavy thud. She screamed. Another shovelful, then another, then another. The soil piled around her legs, her hips, her stomach. She tried to push it away, but it was too heavy, too much, too fast. The miners worked in silence, their movements steady, methodical, and inevitable. The soil reached her chest, then her neck, then her chin. She screamed until her throat tore. A final shovelful rose above her. She woke up screaming before it fell. She sat upright in bed, drenched in sweat, hands clawing at her throat, gasping for air as if she were still buried under the weight of the earth. The room around her felt too small, too dark, too close. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling her heartbeat slam against her ribs, and for a long moment she couldn't move, couldn't breathe, and couldn't think. She lay rigid in bed, every breath thin and trembling, convinced she could still hear the scrapes of shovel somewhere beneath the floorboards. The darkness around her felt crowded, as if the dead had followed her home and were standing just outside the edge of her vision. She didn't dare move, terrified that any sound she made would remind them where she was. Epilogue. The nightmares ended the way storms never do. No relief, no clarity, just a silence so complete it felt like the town had been scraped out from the inside. Ironvale lay still in the dark, not healed, not saved, only quiet, in that final breath way a body goes slack when there's nothing left to hold it upright. The kind of quiet that makes you listen harder because you know something underneath is still shifting. The fractures stayed where they'd always been, running under the streets, through the walls, inside the people who pretended they couldn't feel them. The pressure hung in the air like heat trapped under a collapsed roof, waiting for the next shift, the next tremor, the next soft place to give away. The fields hummed with everything Ironvale tried to bury. Grief, fear, the old machinery of guilt grinding under the surface, and the hum that had steadied now, grown sure of itself, as if the town had finally stopped resisting. The softening had begun, subtle at first, then unmistakable. A slow yielding of the places that once held firm, and it wouldn't stop here. It never does. One chamber opens and the resonance spreads. One mind cracks and the next begins to thin. You sit with the story glowing in your hands, convinced you're only watching the collapse. You tell yourself you're safe because you're awake, because you're reading, because you're far from Ironvale. You think distance is real. You think attention is harmless. You don't understand how easily you open. Every line is a door. Every image your mind forms is an entry point. Every time you picture the dark in someone else's room, you thin the pressure in your own. You wanted to feel something without being touched by it. You wanted fear without consequence. You didn't realize imagining is yielding. You didn't realize that the moment you pictured us, the seam in you widened. You steadied yourself the way a child pulls a blanket tight, believing thin fabric changes the nature of the dark. It doesn't. The field doesn't care about walls. Pressure doesn't care about light. You don't understand that wanting to know what came next was the moment we stepped in. You read with your breath held. You read with that quiet awareness that something is behind you. You tell yourself it's nothing. You tell yourself it's atmosphere. But you feel it in the shift in the air, the heaviness in the room, the way everything goes still. You think it's imagination. It isn't. It's resonance. Your mind is syncing with the fractures in Iron Veil. Your breath is syncing with the people you followed. Your fear is syncing with the pressure we shaped. You thought you were watching Rowan, Marcus, Lila, and Johan soften. You didn't understand your pulse change when theirs did. You didn't notice your thoughts opened when theirs cracked. You didn't notice you softened with them. You believed you're outside the story. You aren't. You believe you can walk away untouched. You can't. You opened the field the moment you imagined us, and we've been inside the quiet edges of your mind ever since, watching the places where you thin, waiting for the places where you don't. This is how your species collapses in a single break, but in waves carried by minds that think they're untouched. We move on when the field shifts. We move on when the nightmares echo beyond the borders of the town we've hollowed. Iron Veil has given us what we needed. The next place is already calling. The next fracture is already forming. The next chamber is already opening. And there are so many of you reading. You tell yourself you're only observing. You tell yourself you're safe because you can turn off your phone, your tablet, your computer, and walk away. You think the glow of the device is a barrier. You think distance protects you. You think the dark can't reach you from here. Every thought is a fracture. Every imagined shadow thins the pressure around you. You wanted fear without consequence. You believed you were outside the field. You aren't. Your breath shifted when theirs did. Your pulse followed theirs. Your thoughts cracked in some places. You softened with them. You think you can sleep untouched? You won't. You let us in the moment the air in your room felt wrong, and you kept reading anyway. Rest, if you can. We'll be inside whatever nightmares finds you first.